Welcome back to Bazooka Kickboxing and MMA. Today's episode, powered by Hayabusa, is an important concept called controlling the center of the ring or cage. In today's episode, we're talking about controlling the center of the ring or cage, which can be a tough concept for a lot of fighters because it needs confidence. It needs you to be able to track your opponent around your canvas, right? And be able to set them up, cut them off, and be able to punish them. Too many times we see one fighter always walking, right? And just chasing their opponent and they can't hit them. So one, that fighter a lot of time gets very frustrated. They put up their hands and they start, come on. But really, it's almost a lack of understanding on how to cut your opponent off. So when I watch that, I'm almost more frustrated at the fighter who's chasing, right? You never want to chase, right? If you're that pressure fighter wanting to hurt them, you have to cut them off. So cutting them off is the first thing we're going to discuss. And that's what I call my lateral tracking. In order to track someone and to control that center of the ring, you have to be able to stay in front of them. Now, there's a big discussion about it being more difficult or easier on a ring versus a cage. Why? Because a ring is basically a square. Not basically a square, it is a square, and you can kind of herd your opponent into the corners of them, which make it very difficult for them to move. So a big part of my career was controlling the ring tactics to get my opponent into the corner, and once they're in the corner now, you have two options, and what I like to do is I like to walk them into my low kicks or walk them in this way into my big hooks. So it's all about getting them into the corners. But in the UFC and an octagon or sometimes circle cages, it's very difficult to control them. So we have to lateral track in a different way. So the way you have to do it is you always have to make sure you use your lead foot always tracks your opponent, right? If there's a moment where your opponent is over here, right, you've already lost them and then you're constantly chasing them. So what I always want to do is make sure my lead foot is pointing at my opponent. But what's going to happen now when you're in an octagon is you're going to have to square up sometimes. If I stay very narrow like this, it's easy for someone moving to dance around. So if I step here hard and they're already over there, and now I have to turn, and if I start walking, now I'm starting to chase. So if I'm here, and now I step laterally to track so I can hit and keep moving, I'm always staying in front by using my lateral tracking, right? So this is a moment where, a lot of times you say you never want to be in a square stance. Well, when I'm tracking someone, right, and my front foot's, right now I'm in attack range. Here, I'm outside of my range. I understand distance and range, so I know I cannot get hit, but I have to be able to track laterally a little quicker in a cage. And if I stay in a stance, right, it's very slow for me to have to gallop. If they're walking slowly, yeah, I'm gonna box step my way. But usually they're gonna move and escape very fast. So that's when I have to make sure I square up my stance a little bit and keep my front foot always tracking my opponent. The front foot always has to stay looking, right? And then there's opportunities where I have to track being lateral, right? But you just need to be careful of them being able to shoot and counter. The second thing you need to make sure to control the center of the ring is having some threats from the center. If I'm just trying to control the center of the ring with a high guard, I'm inviting my opponent to move, dance around, hit and move and evade. So I need to put some threat out there. It's one, important to be able to control them, but you have to win the fight. You have to create some sort of offense. So this is what I like to call occupying space and mixing it with feints. I can't just sit here. So by feinting at least, my opponent might back up and I could step forward, right? And the thing is, when I'm tracking someone, I need to score. So as soon as they hit the back part of the cage, they can only go left and right. So at that point, I got to make sure I can continue to track and move and follow them. If I know that they've backed up against the cage of the wall and then I start throwing punches here, it's easy for them to move. So I have to occupy space here just to kind of see the reaction they're doing. So as soon as they touch, I might feint and then I see them escape here and then I could open my body up and follow them, right? Or if I feint and I see them move there, I step out. So you can see I'm always able to stay and control that center, right? Because I'm not overthrowing my strikes. And by occupying space, right, I'm stopping my opponent from coming in. Usually when someone's moving around dancing, they might move and then try to explode something fast at you. Close that distance quick because they don't want to play the power game. They have to close that distance quickly. So by me occupying space, right, I'm just touching here. And as soon as you step in, right, I can just quickly turn one of these punches over and snap them and do some damage. So by keeping these punches here, if I'm avoiding a takedown, I might throw some up punches, right? But I'm keeping, strikes in front, keeping them, that occupying of the space, and by feinting and occupying space. So that's gonna keep them away, and it's gonna allow me to stay forward, controlling that ring. Because ideally, if they're gonna come and attack, I might have to retreat, and then I just gave up the center. So when someone blitzes, you can either just stand there, control them, fight them up, then push them back, which is what some fighters do. They'll draw the line and say, I'm not moving backwards, right? So boom, even though they blitz you, you'll stand your guard, push them off and attack. But in a small glove, like I keep talking about, could be at more risk, so you might want to evade, but then you got to come back and control. So keep occupying space and keep feinting. Now, I briefly mentioned it, right? When you pressure and you control the center of the ring, you have to be able to now use their movement to set up attacks, right? So the best thing you want to do is attack the lateral, right? So a lot of times I talk about this being my lateral tracking, and this is one of the best ways to land your hooks and your kicks, right? So now the idea of controlling the ring is now having your opponent move left or right. They can't come forward and backwards, right? Because you're dominating that space. They can only go left or right. So you have to create a setup, a game plan now. So when I'm lined up with my opponent, right? Now I'm just waiting for them to move. Now I'm waiting, I'm probing. If they go one way, guess what? I'm gonna turn, load up my big punches, boom. So as soon as they exited thinking they're safe, I'm gonna attack them. So I'm attacking on their exit. Same thing, if you step this way, this is when I like to throw my big low kick. So whichever direction you go, you're gonna get punished, I'm gonna hit you. If you come forward, boom, I'm hitting you with jabs. You can't move backwards because the ropes and the cage is behind you. So now you're using the controlling of the ring to your advantage, and you're scoring, and you're walking them into safe low kicks, big power punches. You're dominating the fight and you're winning. Now, the example in my career, which this used really well, is obviously my fight with Raymond Daniels. He was a blitzer, and the idea of controlling the center of the ring is vital when you fight someone like that. So you see that I really used a lot of high guard tracking, right? Because it's kickboxing, I had to control him. I needed him against the ropes so he couldn't spin kick me and he couldn't blitz. The closer I was to him, the safer I was. So high guard pressure with the blitz and lateral tracking, constantly chopping the legs on the lateral track, or when he circled the one way, watch the finishing sequence. Low kicks, hooks with level changing, put him in a corner. As soon as he tries to escape the corner, head kick to the head. Lateral tracking at its finest. So that's the most important thing, attacking on their exit. Now, an important concept as well in dominating the center is getting the shell. I need my opponent to shell up. If they're always moving, that's a big problem, right? Because I'm always having to chase or they're trying to counter me. So I have to get my opponent to shell up sometimes, right? Because I need them to stop. In order for me to attack, I need them to stop. And if they have a lot of endurance moving and dancing around, it can be very frustrating. So I have to get them to shell. Whether I throw hard body kicks, whether I use knee-up feints to get them to shell up for a minute, but I need that moment for them to shell up so I can maybe one punch or get them to go left or right to be able to punish them. So always chasing and lateral tracking can be frustrating. So sometimes you need to create the shell opportunities. So maybe it's a quick knee up to grab a clinch for a moment, fight them in a clinch, evade, throw some attacks. So sometimes controlling the ring requires you to use the clinch and grab them, pressure them, using the feints, but getting the shell for that moment will help you, especially if you need a break. It could be exhausting always tracking, but the idea is even you pressuring, your opponent should be more tired than you. So getting your opponent to shell sometimes is a safe way for you to control the center of the ring as well as land, okay? So the biggest priority for you in fighting, right, should be how do I land and do the most damage without sustaining any, right? So if I'm a pressure fighter, you think automatically getting hit. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. You can still manage distance really well and have good defense, right? So me pressure fighting, if I'm just going to attack, I know I might get countered because that's the movement fighter strategy. So boom, I got the shell. Now I can control their hands, enter, create my attacks, attack them going left or right. And then this whole sequence, I was able to do damage and stay safe. Now, the last thing I want you to not do is point number 5 is if you want to land and win the fight, you can't just throw big power singles. And I created videos on things that drive me nuts and piss me off when watching fights. And this has to be one of the highest ones where I see guys just literally throwing one big bombing punch against a guy moving. A guy moving is going to have probably good distance control. He's evading shots. A single shot isn't going to slow him down, stop him. You have to maybe play counter the counter, use probing shots, set things up. It's not enough to be able to control the ring and get one big punch. Usually they're going to be able to move past that. If I'm in a hard stance and I throw a big punch and my opponent evades or moves, now I'm back in a chasing mood, right? So you have to be able to set your shots up, put things in combinations, right? That is the key, right? Not everything has to be a power shot. Probe shots, long punches, set up attacks to set up the power shots. And one of the biggest things I always tell my team and my fighters is you have to put even one strikes together in equal a combination. Single strikes together is a combination, but it's important to put combinations with another combination. Put 2 combos together. 2 combo drill, we call it here, because the first combination might close the distance, the second one gets the finish, right? So you have to learn to close that distance safely, and throwing big single power shots is not the way to do it effectively. All right, so I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It's all about controlling the center of the ring and doing it properly. Remember, it's okay to go neutral for a little bit to be able to close distance faster. If I'm staying here, it's too hard to move, especially if I'm an MMA fighter. I can stay maybe in my stance if I got the corners in a kickboxing fight, but just be aware you might have to square up to be able to move lateral faster. But the importance is make sure you punish them for moving. If you get them against the cage and you're controlling and dominating, have a game plan, a system, a systematic destruction of being able to attack them when they exit is a good key. It's important, yes, to control it, but what you do with the control, right, is what's going to make you win and make you to be great, right? And if I'm going to attack, make sure you do it safely by getting the shell and making sure you set them up. Put combos, put sequences together, and that's where the artistry of martial arts comes from. So, hope you enjoyed the episode. Keep liking, sharing Bazooka Kickboxing with your friends. And guess what? Bazooka Kickboxing is now online at bazookatraining.com, where we get home workouts as well as bag workouts and tutorials for you to constantly learn at home. Gyms in Ontario are still closed, so this is my way of fighting back to get Bazooka Kickboxing for you guys at home. If you enjoy the channel sponsors and the sick gear that I'm always wearing, head over to hayabusaffight.com, as well as Perfect Sports Nutrition using code Bazooka20 to get 20% off your supplements. All the links are in the description below. And again, the Bazooka merchandise, go to bazookashop.com. We'll see you next time.
Over 1 year in lockdown, an empty gym, a divided community, many questions unanswered.
They're doing the best they can, trying to save their business.
But on one man's 36th birthday, he decided to fight back. Subscribe now for only $9.99 USD a month. BazookaTraining.com.